Las Vegas, the summer of 1971. Backstage at the International Hotel, an hour before the second show of the night, Tom Jones stood alone in front of a mirror, and he could not make a sound. He opened his mouth. Nothing came, just air and a low scrape where his voice used to be. For 6 weeks he had sold out every seat in that room, 2 shows a night, no nights off. And now, on the one evening that mattered most, the instrument that had carried him out of a coal town in Wales had simply stopped answering. A stagehand knocked twice on the door. 15 minutes, Mr. Jones." Tom did not turn around. He tried one more note, quietly, the way a man tests a bridge before he trusts it with his weight. It broke in the middle. And then came a second knock, softer, and a voice he did not expect. "There's someone here to see you," the stagehand said. "He came in through the kitchen so nobody would notice. It's Elvis." Tom closed his eyes. Of all the nights, the one man in the world he most wanted to sing for was sitting in his showroom. And Tom Jones, the voice of Las Vegas, could barely whisper. What happened in the next hour was never printed in any newspaper. The people who were in that room told it quietly for years and always the same way. This is that night. And it did not go the way anyone would guess. Tom Jones did not come from a world with a safety net. He was born in Pontypridd, a mining town in Wales, where men went down into the dark before dawn and came up gray with dust. His father was one of them. Tom had spent his boyhood being told, kindly and often, that boys like him did not become anything. The voice was the only thing he had that no one could take. It was not a gift he treated lightly. He had guarded it, all the way from working men's clubs where drunks shouted over him, to television, to the biggest stage in America. And now, at the height of everything, his body was betraying him. 6 weeks of 2 shows a night had left the muscles of his throat swollen and raw. A doctor had told him that afternoon to rest for a week. Tom had laughed at him. There was no week. There was tonight. He remembered his father coming home from the pit, coughing that same dry cough, and never once complaining. Men in Pontypridd did not complain. They went back down the next morning. Tom looked at the swollen thing his throat had become and heard his father's voice in his head. "You do the work. You keep your word. You do not let people down who paid to see you." He sat backstage and did the arithmetic that every performer secretly fears. What if the voice never fully came back? What if this was the beginning of the end, and it happened here, in front of the one man whose respect he could not bear to lose? Because Elvis was not just a fellow star to Tom Jones. When Tom had first arrived in America, unknown and unsure, it was Elvis who had walked up to him singing one of Tom's own songs, word for word, grinning like a kid. From that day, something had passed between them that neither ever fully explained. Elvis believed in him. And tonight, Tom had nothing to give him but a broken sound and an empty throat. To understand what was at stake, you have to understand what Las Vegas was in 1971. It was not the neon theme park it later became. It was a city of showrooms, of velvet and cigarette smoke, where the biggest names in the world stood 20 feet from the audience with nothing between them and the crowd but a microphone. There were no giant screens, no backing tracks. If your voice failed, everyone knew instantly. And Tom Jones was the king of that room. When he walked on stage at the International, women threw hotel keys at his feet. Men who had come to laugh at him stayed to cheer. He did not lip-sync a single note. He could not have. His whole power was that the sound was real, that it poured out of him like something he could barely contain. A Tom Jones show was a promise. You came to hear a man sing louder and truer than seemed humanly possible. That was the deal. That was what the tickets were for. Which is exactly why this night was so dangerous. Because a Vegas headliner did not cancel. You did not put up a sign that said the show was off. The room was full. The lights were warming. And somewhere out in that darkness sat Elvis Presley, who had watched Tom Jones sing many times and had never once seen him falter. The one thing Tom had always been able to do, no matter what else was falling apart, was open his mouth and let the voice save him. Tonight, for the first time, it might not. The stagehand came back a third time. 10 minutes. Out in the showroom, the band had taken their places behind the vintage microphones. The audience was settling, the murmur of 1,000 voices rising and falling like a tide. Tom stood at the edge of the curtain and looked out at them. He could see the front tables, the candlelight, the fur and the diamonds, the faces already smiling because they were about to see Tom Jones. And he thought, for one long moment, about walking away. Not off stage, out. Out through the same kitchen Elvis had used, into the desert night, and never coming back. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to protect the legend by refusing to risk it. A canceled show is forgotten in a week. A voice that cracks in front of a full room, in front of Elvis Presley, is remembered forever. Tom's manager appeared at his shoulder, pale, whispering that they could tell the crowd he was ill, that no one would blame him. And Tom almost said yes. His hand was already reaching for the exit. That was the moment the dressing room door opened behind him. Heavy footsteps. A familiar drawl, low and calm, meant for no one but Tom. "Where do you think you're going?" Tom turned, and there, filling the doorway in a dark jacket with his collar up so no one would know him, stood Elvis Presley. He was not smiling the way the fans imagined. He looked, if anything, deadly serious. He crossed the room in 3 steps and put a hand on Tom's shoulder. It is easy now to picture Elvis Presley in 1971 as a figure of pure confidence, the man in the white jumpsuit who owned every room he entered. But the men who knew him then saw something else underneath. By 1971, Elvis was already tired in a way that frightened the people around him. The endless shows, the pills to sleep and the pills to wake, the machine of fame that never let him stop. He knew exactly what it felt like to stand in the wings and wonder if the thing that made you special had begun to slip away. That was the strange bond between these two men. From the outside, they were untouchable, magnetic, larger than life. From the inside, they were 2 working-class boys who had climbed so high that the fall, if it came, would be unimaginable. Elvis had not come to the International that night to be entertained. He had heard, through the small private network that ran between Vegas dressing rooms, that Tom was in trouble, that the voice was gone. And so he had done something Elvis Presley almost never did. He had slipped in quietly through the kitchen, past the cooks and the steam and the clatter of plates, so that no crowd would form, no cameras would flash, and no one would turn Tom's worst night into a spectacle. He had come as a friend, not as a king. The question was what he would do now that he was here, because the clock backstage was still moving, and Tom Jones still could not sing. Tom Jones walked onto the stage of the International Hotel on the night his voice had failed him, and the room erupted before he sang a single note. He raised the microphone, the band held, and what came out was not the polished, thunderous Tom Jones they had paid to hear. The first phrase was rough. It caught. Anyone who knew his voice could hear that something was wrong, that he was singing on a wound. And here is the thing that no one who was there ever forgot. It did not matter. Because Tom Jones stopped trying to hide it. He leaned into the crack in his own voice, and he sang through it, sang with everything the night had left him, and the strain in the sound made it more human, not less. He was not a machine anymore. He was a man, standing in the light, refusing to quit. By the third song, the audience had stopped listening for perfection and started listening for the fight. They could feel it, the way a crowd always can. When his voice broke on a high note, a woman at a front table pressed her hand to her mouth and did not laugh and did not pity him. She simply watched a man give everything he had. She had been coming to Vegas for 20 years. She had seen 100 flawless shows and forgotten every one of them. She would remember this one until the day she died. That is the strange secret of a live room. Perfection is admired for an evening. Courage is remembered for a lifetime. In the shadows at the side of the stage, Elvis Presley stood with his arms folded, and he was not looking at a rival. He was watching a friend do the bravest thing a performer can do: sing anyway. And when Tom finished the last song, the room did not just applaud, it stood. What Elvis said next, Tom Jones repeated for the rest of his life, though he could never say it without his own voice going rough. Elvis did not tell him the voice would be fine. He did not offer some easy comfort. Instead, he leaned in close, so close that Tom could smell the cologne and the cigarettes. And he said something that landed harder than any pep talk ever could. "They didn't come to hear a perfect note," Elvis said. "They came to hear you. Broken or not, you're still the best singer in this town. Now get out there and let them love you." Then he said the part Tom never forgot. "I've had nights I couldn't hit it either. Every one of us has. The difference between a great one and a coward is what he does in the next 10 seconds. So what are you going to do, Tom?" For a moment, neither man moved. The band was starting the overture. The light beyond the curtain had turned to gold. Tom Jones looked at the man who, from the outside, seemed to have everything, and understood for the first time that Elvis was not talking about tonight. He was talking about himself. He was talking about every performer who had ever stood in the dark and been afraid. And something in Tom, some old miner's son refusal to be beaten, straightened his spine. He did not answer with words. He simply nodded once, squeezed Elvis's arm, and turned toward the light. Elvis stepped back into the shadows where no one would see him, and he waited. Tom Jones came off that stage soaked through and shaking, and Elvis was the first person he saw. Neither of them said much. Elvis just grinned, that old kid's grin from the day they first met, and said, "Told you." Then he was gone, back through the kitchen the way he had come, before anyone could turn the night into a story. But the people in that room never forgot it. The waiters, the band, the woman at the front table. For years afterward, they would say that the greatest Tom Jones show they ever saw was the night his voice was broken. Not because it was flawless, because it was true. Tom's voice healed in time. He sang for another 50 years. He would go on to reinvent himself again and again, long after Elvis was gone. But he never forgot what he learned in that dressing room, from a man everyone thought was invincible and who quietly was not. That the audience does not fall in love with perfection. They fall in love with a human being who refuses to give up in front of them. There's a lesson in that night that belongs to more than singers. All of us, sooner or later, face the evening when the thing we counted on fails us. When the voice, whatever our voice is, will not come. And on that night, we get to choose. We can slip out through the kitchen and protect the version of ourselves we used to be. Or we can walk into the light, cracked and afraid, and give what we have left anyway. Tom Jones chose the light, and a tired, generous man in a dark jacket stood in the shadows and made sure he did.